The late afternoon light slanted through the curtains, laying long golden bars across the living room floor. I had just finished polishing the old oak table, the one my wife and I had bought when Daniel was still in grade school. Even after all these years, I still caught myself talking to her as if she were just in the next room. The silence in the house was heavy, but in its weight, I found comfort. Daniel was supposed to stop by later, and I had been looking forward to it all week. I straightened my shirt, a pale blue one that still carried a faint trace of starch, and I checked the small glass bowl of mints I always kept by the door. Little rituals like these gave me a sense of order, a sense of still belonging somewhere in the rhythm of life. My hands were slower now, but I liked the way they still knew what to do without me thinking too hard. That's when my phone vibrated on the counter. Just a quick buzz, sharp in the quiet. I expected a short message from Daniel. Maybe he was running late. Maybe he wanted me to put on a pot of coffee. But when I picked up the phone, the name that filled the screen wasn't his. It was Martin Ellis. My lawyer. My friend. A man who had stood beside me for more than 3 decades. The message was only 3 words, but they froze me in place. Call me urgently. I stared at them, my thumb hovering above the glass. Urgent wasn't a word Martin tossed around. He was steady, deliberate, always careful with language. Something in my chest tightened as I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, and then his voice came through. "Robert," he said quickly, his tone clipped, breathless. "Are you alone?" I frowned, glancing around at the stillness of the house, the framed photos lining the walls. "Yes, I'm alone. Why? What's going on?" There was a pause, and in that silence, I could hear something in Martin's breathing strained, like he was choosing his next words with surgical care. "Don't panic. Just listen to me. Don't let Daniel know you. And I spoke until I tell you otherwise." The words rattled me more than if he'd shouted. I sank into the armchair by the window, the phone pressed tightly to my ear, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Martin," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're scaring me. What is this about?" Another pause. A sigh that sounded like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. "It's about your son, Robert. There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you sooner." The air seemed to shift in the room, the golden light now heavy and strange. My hand tightened around the phone, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My son. My Daniel. The boy I had carried on my shoulders. The man I believed would carry on our family's name with pride. Whatever words were about to come next would change everything. And that was the moment I realized my world was about to split in 2. The line went quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. Martin had never sounded like this before. Calm, measured, that was his way. But now, his voice was low, urgent, stripped of the easy warmth I had always trusted. "Robert," he said again, slower this time. "I need you to focus. Are you sitting down?" "I am," I answered, though my body already felt as though it had turned to stone in the chair. "Just tell me, Martin. You've known me too long to circle around something." I heard him inhale, steadying himself. "What I'm about to say, it's not rumor. It's not speculation. I've reviewed documents, signatures, transfers. I wanted to be sure before I called you." He paused, and for an instant I almost wished the call would drop, that I'd be spared whatever truth waited behind his words. But his voice carried on, gentle and grave. "It's about Daniel." The name hit me like a hammer. My son's name. I felt it echo in my chest, and for the first time in my life, it didn't bring comfort. Daniel? I repeated, my voice rough. What about him? Is he hurt? Did something happen? No, not like that, Martin replied quickly, but the rush in his tone didn't soothe me. He's fine physically. But Robert, he hasn't been honest with you. He's been doing things you needed to know about. Long ago. I pressed my free hand to my forehead, the skin clammy beneath my palm. Images flashed. Daniel as a boy, his hand in mine crossing a street. His first day of college. The time he showed up on my porch after his divorce. His eyes red from crying. I had always thought of myself as his anchor, the one person he could lean on when the world seemed too cruel. The thought that he had secrets, serious ones, was almost unbearable. What are you saying, Martin? My voice cracked despite the effort to hold it steady. What could Daniel possibly be hiding from me that requires this kind of warning? Martin's tone lowered further, as if he were afraid the walls might hear. I'll explain everything in detail, but you must promise me something first. You can't let him know I told you. Not yet. Not a word, not even a hint. If he realizes you're aware, he'll cover his tracks, and we'll lose the chance to uncover the full truth. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The idea of pretending in front of my own son felt impossible, like asking me to cut out my own heart and keep smiling. But something in Martin's voice, steady, unwavering, and edged with fear, told me I didn't have a choice. All right, I whispered. I won't say anything. But Martin, you'd better tell me exactly what's going on. There was another pause, the kind that stretches and bends time. Then Martin exhaled, and when he spoke, the words landed like stones, dropped into still water, rippling out into every corner of my life. It's about your house, Robert. Your name isn't the only one on the deed anymore. For a long moment, I couldn't make sense of the words. The deed to my house? My home? The place I had built plank by plank, repaired through storms, painted with my own hands after Eleanor passed. The silence stretched so long that Martin spoke again, softer now, as if coaxing me back from the edge. Robert, listen to me. I know this is a shock, but before I tell you more, I need you to understand how carefully this has been done. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some clerical error. Someone put your son's name on that deed without your consent. I closed my eyes and leaned back, feeling the weight of the chair beneath me. The words felt too heavy, too foreign. My son's name where it didn't belong. A betrayal, whispered on official paper. My mind drifted, unbidden, into the past. I saw myself 25 years younger, standing in the driveway with Daniel, handing him the keys to his first car. It was an old Chevy I'd spent months repairing after work, my fingers raw from turning wrenches. I remembered the way his face lit up, how he'd thrown his arms around me and said, "You're the best, Dad." I believed him. I wanted to. Every sacrifice I made after that seemed worth it. I thought of the long nights I worked double shifts on construction sites, the times I climbed steel beams under winter rain just to bring in enough to cover his tuition. When his marriage fell apart years later, it was me who emptied my savings to help him find his footing again. He used to call me his rock, and I wore that title like a badge of honor. How could the boy I had carried on my shoulders at county fairs, the young man whose broken heart I had tried to mend, now be the man forging his name into the story of my life without asking? Robert? Martin's voice pulled me back. Are you still with me? I'm here, I managed. My throat was tight, every word like gravel. I don't understand. Why would he do this? He has his own place, his own life. What would he want with mine? That's what we're going to find out, Martin said. His tone had steadied again. Practical. The way lawyers do when they move from sympathy to strategy. But you need to prepare yourself. This wasn't a single act. There are other documents, transfers, things that suggest a pattern. I'll walk you through them. Just know, it all began with that deed. I stared across the room at the framed photograph of Daniel on his graduation day, cap tilted, his smile unguarded, my arms slung proudly around his shoulders. That moment had felt like a promise, a bridge to the future. But bridges, I knew better than most, could collapse if the foundation was betrayed. And now, with Martin's words still ringing in my ears, I feared that mine already had. The room felt colder, though the evening sun was still spilling gold across the floor. I held the phone tighter, as if I could steady myself through the weight of Martin's voice alone. He didn't rush. He knew I needed time to let the words sink in, time to breathe around them. But the silence stretched too far. And finally, he spoke again. Robert, this isn't just about the deed. I went back through the paperwork from the last year, documents you never should have had to sign, or so you thought. There are inconsistencies, transfers you didn't authorize, signatures that don't match the careful, steady hand I've seen from you for decades. My chest tightened. What kind of documents? Insurance policies, retirement withdrawals, small at first amounts that wouldn't raise alarm but steady, precise, like someone testing how much they could take before being noticed. I pressed my hand against the armrest, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my palm. It grounded me, if only for a moment. My mind reeled, reaching for excuses that might shield Daniel from suspicion. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Martin had misread the numbers. Maybe some clerk at the bank had made a mistake. I wanted to believe any explanation, but the one dangling in front of me. Martin, I said, my voice hoarse. Daniel, he wouldn't do this. He knows this house, this savings. It's all I have left. After Eleanor, after everything, he knows. Martin didn't answer right away. His silence was a kindness, giving me space to say the words, even if they rang hollow. At last he replied, steady and firm. I wish I could tell you it was all a mistake. But Robert, the pattern is clear. Someone has been moving money. Someone has been preparing the ground for more. And the trail keeps circling back to Daniel. I felt my breath hitch. The image of my son filled my mind, not the man he was now, but the boy who used to sit beside me on summer evenings, dangling his legs off the porch while we watched the fireflies come out. He would rest his head against my arm, ask me questions about the stars. I used to promise him that as long as I was alive, I'd keep him safe. Now the question clawed at me. Who was going to keep me safe from him? I can't believe it, I whispered. The words tasted bitter, like ash. I just can't. You don't have to believe it all at once, Martin said gently. You only need to be careful. Don't let on what you know. Not yet. The advice hung heavy in the air, but I knew he was right. If Daniel was hiding something, confronting him too soon would only drive it deeper underground. Still, the thought of facing my son with this knowledge burning in my chest, it was almost too much to bear. And as the shadows lengthened across the floor, I realized the first crack in the life I thought I'd built was no longer just a crack. It was widening, and I feared what else might break before I could stop it. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, staring at the stack of papers Martin had sent over. Every page felt like an intruder in my home. The ink was clean, the signatures confident, too confident. They looked like mine, but they weren't. I knew the slope of my own letters, the way my hand always faltered slightly at the end of my name. These lines were too smooth, too practiced. They were an imitation, a mask worn on paper. I turned to the deed, the one document that seemed to hum with its own cruel weight. There, beside my name, was Daniel's, my son's name written as though it belonged next to mine, as though the years of sweat, of saving, of sacrifice were his to inherit early, without asking. My throat closed around the sight of it. It was one thing to imagine mistakes in an account, but this was different. This was my home. The walls I had painted, the floorboards Eleanor and I had chosen, the garden we had planted together in our younger days, all of it reduced to lines of ink, shared with a son who had never once asked if he should. I whispered into the empty room, "Why, Daniel?" My voice cracked in the silence. "Why would you do this to me?" I remembered the day he helped me move in, all those years ago. He carried boxes up the porch steps with a grin, his shirt damp with sweat, telling me how proud he was of me for buying the place outright. "One day this'll be mine to take care of," he had said, laughing, nudging me with the easy affection of a son who believed in a long, safe future. I never thought he meant it like this. The phone buzzed on the table, making me jump. A new message from Martin. Asterisk. "We'll need to act carefully. Don't let Daniel suspect. I'll explain everything tomorrow." Asterisk. I set the phone down, my hand trembling. The house around me felt unfamiliar, as though the walls themselves had overheard the betrayal written into that deed. I pushed back from the table and walked into the hallway, my eyes falling on the photographs hanging in neat rows. Daniel as a child, holding a baseball bat too big for his hands. Daniel at his wedding, eyes bright with hope. Daniel holding his daughter for the first time. Pride softening every feature of his face. The faces in those frames didn't match the name on that deed. They belonged to someone else, a boy I loved, a man I thought I knew. I stood there for a long time, staring at the proof of my life, until the night pressed in too heavy. I knew then that nothing would ever look the same again. Tomorrow would bring more answers. But tonight, I was left with only the unbearable truth. My son's signature sat beside mine, carved into the very foundation of my world. The morning came, gray and heavy, as though the sky itself knew what I had learned the night before. I moved slowly. Making coffee, I barely tasted, my body following routine, while my mind churned with the weight of that forged deed. By the time the doorbell rang, my chest tightened. I knew who it was even before I opened the door. Daniel stood there with his easy smile, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of roasted chicken and warm bread. "Thought I'd bring dinner for us tonight," he said, stepping forward as if nothing in the world was wrong. His voice carried that same boyish cheer it always had, the kind that used to lift my heart. But now, every note felt sharpened, like a blade pressed against me. I forced a smile, stepping aside to let him in. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, though my throat felt dry. "You didn't have to." "Of course I did," he replied, setting the bag on the counter. "You've been looking a little tired lately, Dad. Let me take care of things for once." He turned, grinning, but I saw it differently now. The warmth seemed rehearsed, practiced, like an actor hitting his mark on stage. We sat down together at the table. He talked about his business, about opportunities just on the horizon, about a project that was this close to paying off. He gestured with his hands, eyes shining, weaving dreams out of air the way he always had. Once, I would have believed him without question. But as I watched him, I remembered the numbers Martin had shown me, the documents that told a different story. His words no longer sounded like hope. They sounded like cover. "You're quiet tonight," Daniel said after a while, leaning back in his chair. His gaze lingered on me, searching. "Everything okay?" I looked down at my plate, my fork resting untouched beside the chicken. The air between us was thick with unspoken truths. I thought of Martin's warning, "Don't let him know yet." So I raised my head, forced the corners of my mouth into something resembling calm. "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just didn't sleep well." He nodded, his expression softening into concern, the kind that used to comfort me. But tonight, it unsettled me, because I couldn't tell where the truth ended and the performance began. He reached across the table, gave my hand a quick squeeze. "You've always carried too much on your shoulders, Dad. Let me handle more of it now. Trust me." Those words, "trust me," landed heavier than any blow. I managed a small nod, my chest aching as I played along with the lie. I watched him laugh, pour us each a drink, and talk about trivial things, as though the walls weren't closing in around me. And in that moment, as I smiled back at my son, I knew with chilling certainty the mask he wore was not for the world. It was for me. And I had no choice but to wear mine too. After Daniel left that evening, the house felt emptier than it had in years. The faint smell of roasted chicken still lingered in the kitchen, but it only turned my stomach. I sat in my chair by the window, staring at the street lamp outside, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. His laughter still echoed in my ears, bright and easy. But behind it, I kept hearing Martin's words. The deed, the forged signatures, the missing money. And Daniel's face so calm, so convincing, as though none of it were true. Sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind wandered backward, digging up fragments I had ignored. Little moments that once seemed harmless, but now carried a darker shade. I remembered the time, not long after Eleanor passed, when a thick envelope from the bank had arrived. I'd set it on the counter, meaning to look at it after supper, but Daniel had picked it up before I could. "Don't bother with this, Dad," he had said, tearing it open with a casual flick of his wrist. "These things are always a mess to read. I'll explain it later." At the time, I was grateful. The numbers were overwhelming, and my grief left me too weary to argue. But now, I wondered, did I ever actually see what was inside? Another memory surfaced me standing in line at the bank, my passbook in hand. Daniel had been beside me, restless, shifting from foot to foot. "Dad, you don't need to waste your time with this," he'd murmured, steering me away from the teller. "Let me handle the paperwork. It's easier if I'm the one talking to them. Less confusion that way." He had smiled, reassuring, as though protecting me from something too complicated. I had taken his word for it, never imagining I was being led away from the truth. The images stacked one on top of another, Daniel reminding me not to worry about quarterly statements because he already checked them. Daniel brushing aside my concerns about unexpected bills. Daniel insisting the market was unpredictable and that he was only shielding me from stress. At the time, I thought it was kindness. I thought it was love. Tonight, those memories cut like glass. I rose from my chair and walked to the mantel where Eleanor's photograph stood. Her smile, frozen in time, was as gentle as ever. I touched the edge of the frame with my fingertips. My voice, barely a whisper. I trusted him, I said. I thought he was looking out for me, the way I always looked out for him. My throat tightened. But maybe I was blind. The silence of the house didn't answer. Only the hum of the refrigerator in the next room and the soft tick of the clock on the wall kept me company. Yet in that silence, I heard the truth echo louder than ever. Daniel's kindness hadn't been protection. It had been a cage. And though I couldn't see it then, I realized now that the bars had been closing in around me for years. The next morning, Martin called again. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight in it. The kind of gravity that comes only when a man has spent a night wrestling with truths he wishes weren't his to deliver. "Robert," he said, "I need you to come to the office today. There are things I have to show you in person." I agreed, though every mile of the drive felt like I was moving deeper into a storm. By the time I stepped into his office, the smell of polished wood and strong coffee wrapped around me like a reminder of every serious conversation we had ever shared. Martin was waiting at his desk, a neat stack of folders before him, his glasses resting low on his nose. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient he doesn't want to hurt with the diagnosis he must give. "Sit down," he said gently. "This won't be easy." I lowered myself into the chair, my hands clenched tight in my lap. Martin slid the first folder across the desk. Inside were statements from my retirement account, my brokerage, even the small savings account Eleanor and I had opened back when we were still young and hopeful. Each page was a wound. Where there should have been steady balances, there were withdrawals. Not once, not twice, but again and again, a slow bleeding of the life I had built. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of the numbers. "This isn't right," I said, though the words felt weak in my mouth. "These figures, they can't be right." "They're real, Robert," Martin said, his voice quiet but firm. "I confirmed them directly with the institutions. What you've been shown these past 2 years were not the real statements." My eyes narrowed. "Shown? By who?" Martin hesitated, then met my gaze. "By Daniel." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the chair, my breath shallow. He went on. Each word, another strike. "The PDFs you've been receiving, the ones that looked official, were altered. He's been sending you doctored reports to hide the truth. In reality, the accounts are nearly drained. Most of your savings, gone." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around a knot of disbelief and grief. I saw Eleanor's face in my mind, the way she used to laugh. When we talked about growing old together, about traveling once the mortgage was paid off, about leaving something solid for Daniel to inherit. We had built our lives like a stone wall, each year another brick, steady and secure. And now, in the span of a few minutes, I was being told that wall had been kicked down from within. 3 words scraped past my lips. Hoarse and broken. "How much left?" Martin's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. "Enough to keep you standing for now. But the security you thought you had, it isn't there anymore." Ha! I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to hold myself together as the weight of it all pressed down. My son, my only son, the boy I had raised to be honest, to be strong. How could he stand in my house, break bread with me, call me Dad, while quietly stealing the very foundation of my life? The papers lay before me like evidence in a trial, and though no judge had yet spoken, I already felt the verdict. My trust was gone, and with it, The future. I thought I knew. That evening, Daniel came by again, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. He walked in carrying a bottle of wine, his smile wide and easy. To him, it was just another visit with his father. To me, it was a test I could not afford to fail. Martin's warning echoed in my head. Asterisk. Don't let him know what you know. Asterisk. I had to play the part, no matter how much it tore at me inside. Dad, Daniel said warmly, setting the wine on the counter. You're looking better tonight. Did you get some rest? He pulled out a chair, his movements casual, his tone light. He looked so much like the boy I once carried on my shoulders that my heart ached. But now, I saw something beneath his ease. Something polished, practiced, like a mask carefully fitted to his face. I forced a smile. A little rest. Yes, I replied, steadying my voice. I even made us some stew. Thought you might like it. That sounds perfect, he said, rubbing his hands together. You always make the best stew. His eyes crinkled as he laughed. And for a moment, I almost believed the lie. Almost let myself fall back into the comfort of routine. But the papers Martin had shown me were still burned into my mind. The hollowed-out accounts, the forged reports. I couldn't unsee them. We sat together at the table, bowls steaming between us. Daniel talked about his day, his words flowing easily, clients he'd met, projects he was planning, the kind of small victories he had always been so eager to share. I nodded, responded when I could, but inside I felt like an actor reciting lines. My chest tightened every time his eyes searched mine, looking for the father who had always trusted him. Tonight that father was gone, replaced by a man who knew too much and could say nothing. At one point, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time I help more with your finances. You shouldn't have to stress over bills or taxes at your age. Let me handle it. I can make sure everything's smooth for you. I stirred my stew slowly, masking the tremor in my hands. That's thoughtful, Daniel, I said softly, forcing the words past the bitterness rising in my throat. You've already done so much. He smiled, satisfied, as though my approval was a key, turning in the lock he'd been building for years. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask him how he could look at me like this after bleeding me dry. But I swallowed it down, burying my fury beneath the mask I now wore. The evening passed in gentle conversation, laughter that rang hollow in my ears. And when he finally left, clapping me on the shoulder as though nothing were wrong, I stood alone in the doorway, watching his car pull away. My smile faded the moment his taillights disappeared into the dark. Martin was right. To survive this, I had to keep performing. I had to be the father Daniel thought he still owned. But deep inside, beneath the mask, something colder had begun to stir. A quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. And I knew the act had only just begun. The following week, Daniel stopped by unannounced. I was in the den, sorting through an old box of photographs, when the door creaked open and his voice carried down the hall. Dad? You home? He sounded cheerful, casual, as though he had simply dropped by to check in. But something about the timing mid-morning, a time he rarely visited, set me on edge. In here? I called, slipping the lid back onto the box. My voice sounded normal, I hoped, though my pulse quickened. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his smile easy, his jacket draped over one arm. Thought I'd swing by. Make sure you weren't getting lonely. He walked into the room, glanced around, and then sat on the edge of the armchair opposite mine. His gaze lingered a little too long on the side table where I kept my mail. We chatted about small things at first. The weather. A ball game he claimed I should have watched. But his eyes kept drifting first to the stack of envelopes, then to the desk, where I kept my checkbook. He laughed when I mentioned pruning the garden roses, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. Instead, there was something restless about him, as if his mind were elsewhere. After a while, I excused myself to the kitchen to put on some tea. As I filled the kettle, I heard faint shuffling from the den. The sound of papers sliding, a drawer opening. My chest tightened. Quietly, I stepped back to the hallway, careful not to let the floor creak. From the doorway, I could see him, my son, standing at my desk, rifling through a folder I'd left on top. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed tight, the mask of casual ease slipping from his face. "Daniel," I said evenly, my voice breaking the silence like glass. He startled, spinning around, the papers still in his hands. His laugh came quick, forced. "Oh, hey, Dad. I was just looking for a pen. Thought you might keep one in here." My gaze dropped to the folder, the pages of insurance documents spread across the desk. "In a file folder?" I asked quietly. He flushed, just for a moment, then closed the folder too quickly, sliding it back into place. "Guess I was distracted," he said, shrugging with an exaggerated grin. "You know me. Always disorganized." I held his eyes, searching for the boy I once knew, the boy who used to run to me, with scraped knees and honest tears. But what stared back at me now was a man who had learned to lie with practiced ease. I forced a thin smile, nodding toward the kitchen. "The kettle's on. Come sit." He followed me, his laugh a little too loud, his words a little too fast. I played along, asking about his work, his daughter, anything to keep the mask intact. But as we sat there with steaming cups between us, I knew the truth. Daniel hadn't come to visit. He had come to search. And what he was looking for, I feared, had nothing to do with pens. When he finally left, waving from the driveway with that same familiar grin, I stood at the window long after his car disappeared. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Something harder had taken root in me. He was hiding more than I had imagined, and the time for pretending might soon run out. That night, I called Martin. I sat in my chair with the lights low, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, as if the quiet of the house could steady me. When he picked up, his voice carried the calm weight I needed. "Tell me everything," he said. And I did. Every glance, every shuffle of paper, the way Daniel had fumbled for an excuse. By the time I finished, silence filled the line. "I was afraid of this," Martin said at last. "He's getting bolder. He thinks you're too trusting, or too tired to notice. That means we can use his confidence against him." My throat tightened. How? The thought of outsmarting my own son felt like a betrayal of its own. Yet what choice did I have? He had already placed himself on the other side of the line I never thought could exist between us. Martin's tone grew firm, strategic. "We need to set a trap. Nothing reckless. Something subtle. Something that will draw him out and force him to reveal his intentions. But you'll have to play your role perfectly." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, Eleanor's face flashing in my memory. She would have told me to be strong, to stand firm even when it hurt. "Tell me what I need to do." Martin explained it step by step. "You're going to plant an idea, innocent, believable, but dangerous to him. You'll let him hear, indirectly, that you're considering selling the house. Not from you directly at first, but through someone we both know can't keep a secret. If Daniel believes you're planning to sell, it threatens everything he's been building. He'll panic, and panic makes people sloppy. My chest tightened. The house. The very place where every memory of Eleanor still lingered in the corners, where Daniel himself had grown from a boy into a man. To use it as bait felt cruel. But then again, hadn't he already turned it into a weapon without my consent? And when he panics? I asked quietly. Then we'll have proof, Martin said. He'll push too hard, reveal too much. That's when we can move. I closed my eyes, letting the plan settle inside me like a stone sinking to the bottom of a pond. It went against every instinct I had as a father. But I knew Martin was right. The boy I once carried on my shoulders was gone. The man who had taken his place had already chosen his path. I had to protect what was left of my home, of my future, of myself. All right, I whispered. I'll do it. There was a pause on the line. Then Martin's voice softened. You're stronger than you think, Robert. Just remember, this isn't betrayal. It's survival. When I hung up, the house seemed to exhale around me. I walked slowly to the window, staring out at the dark yard where the roses Eleanor planted still struggled to bloom. The plan had been set in motion. Tomorrow I would take the first step, and though it broke something inside me to admit it, I knew the next time I saw Daniel's face, I would be waiting not as his father, but as a man preparing for confession of an entirely different kind. The next morning, I rose earlier than usual. The air was cool, the kind of spring air that carried both promise and unease. I dressed with care, though there was no reason to. Today's task wasn't about appearances. It was about planting a seed. A small lie disguised as a weary truth. One that would carry through the grapevine faster than fire through dry grass. I drove into town, my hands steady on the wheel, though my stomach twisted with every mile. The diner sat on the corner of Main Street, a place where the smell of bacon and coffee clung to the walls, and the regulars knew more about each other's business than their own. I had arranged to meet Arthur Pennington there, an old friend who had never mastered the art of keeping a secret. Arthur was already seated by the window when I arrived, his thick glasses sliding down his nose as he read the paper. "Robert!" he called, waving me over. His voice was as booming as ever, the kind that carried across rooms and towns. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about old neighbors, about how our bodies seemed to stiffen more with each passing season. I let the conversation drift until the moment felt right, until his guard was down. Then, with a sigh I had practiced the night before, I leaned back in the booth. "Arthur," I began, my voice quiet, almost tired. "This house of mine, it's getting to be too much. Too many repairs, too many rooms for one man. I've been thinking, maybe it's time I sell it. Move somewhere smaller. Maybe even a retirement place down south." Arthur's eyes widened, the way I knew they would. He set his paper aside, his mouth opening as though I had told him the sky was falling. "Sell? Robert, you can't be serious. That house is your life. You and Eleanor built everything there." I lowered my gaze, letting the silence stretch. "That's just it. Without her, it feels like a mausoleum some days. And Daniel has his own life now. I don't want to rattle around in a house that's more memory than home." Arthur shook his head, muttering about how no one in their right mind would give up a property like mine. But I saw it in his eyes, the spark of gossip already alight. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, though it was still loud enough for the waitress to hear. "Well, if you're really serious, people ought to know. Houses like yours don't sit empty for long." I smiled faintly. though my chest tightened with guilt. Just keep it between us, Arthur. He chuckled, patting my hand. Of course, but I knew better. By dinner, half the town would know, and by evening, Daniel would hear. When I drove home, the weight of the lie pressed hard on me. I stood in my living room, looking at Eleanor's photograph, and whispered, "Forgive me." That night, just as Martin predicted, the phone rang. Daniel's name flashed across the screen. His voice, when I answered, was tight, urgent, and nothing like the easy warmth he'd carried before. "Dad," he said, his words clipped and sharp. "Arthur just called me. He said you're thinking about selling the house. Tell me that's not true." And in that moment, I knew the spark had done its work. The fire had reached my son. "Dad, answer me." Daniel pressed, his voice strained, almost trembling with urgency. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grooves in the wood grain as though they might give me strength. I let a heavy silence stretch before sighing into the receiver. "I only mentioned it in passing," I said, my tone weary. "Practiced. The house feels too big these days. Too many stairs. Too much work for one man. Sometimes, I think it would be easier to let it go." On the other end, Daniel's breath caught. "Number, absolutely not." His voice rose, sharp, in a way I had never heard before. "You can't sell the house, Dad. That place, it's Mom's legacy. Every memory we have of her is tied to those walls. You'd be throwing it all away." "Oh, sell." His words should have softened me, but instead they rang hollow, rehearsed, the plea of a man trying to hide panic behind sentiment. I closed my eyes, remembering Eleanor's laughter in the kitchen, the scent of her garden roses drifting through summer evenings. He was right. The house was filled with her. But the way he spoke of her now, it wasn't grief. It was leverage. "I'm just tired, Daniel," I whispered. "Sometimes I dream of something smaller, something simpler. Arizona, maybe. Sunshine. No broken gutters or leaky roofs." "Dad, listen to me," he snapped, and then quickly softened his tone, catching himself. "Please, just don't make any rash decisions. If it's repairs, I'll handle them. I'll hire someone. You won't have to lift a finger. Just promise me you won't call a realtor." Loathly, his desperation bled through every word. I held the phone tighter, forcing myself to sound unsure. "I haven't done anything yet. I was only thinking out loud." "That's all it takes," he said sharply. Then, lowering his voice again, "You don't understand. Selling the house right now would ruin everything." There was a tremor in his words, a slip of truth he couldn't pull back. My heart clenched. "Ruin everything? Asterisk." The phrase echoed in my mind, like a bell tolling in the night. "Daniel," I asked softly, "what do you mean by that?" There was a pause too long. When he spoke again, his voice was smoother, but the edge of panic still lingered. "I just mean, it would ruin the family. The memories. The stability you've given us." He rushed the words, layering them with practiced concern. But I heard what he hadn't meant to say. The truth buried underneath. My house was more than a home to him. It was a lifeline. When the call ended, I set the phone down and sat in the quiet, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the darkened window. For the first time, I saw not just a father betrayed, but a man holding a lever he hadn't realized he possessed. Daniel's panic had revealed more than he intended, and in that silence, I knew Martin was right. The trap was beginning to close. The next time Daniel came over, the air around him felt different. He still carried his easy smile, still spoke with the same warmth he'd always used to soften me. But beneath it, I could sense the strain. His movements were sharper, his laughter too quick, his eyes restless as they flicked toward the corners of the room, as though searching for something hidden. We sat in the living room, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows against the walls. He poured us each a glass of water, his hand trembling just slightly, a detail he tried to mask with a joke about needing more sleep. I played along, nodding, smiling faintly, though inside, my pulse was steady and cold. Martin's recorder lay tucked inside the hollow of an old clock on the mantel, its tiny red light invisible from where he, Saturday. "Dad," Daniel began, his voice low, more careful than usual. "About what you said, about selling the house. You can't really be considering it." I sighed, leaning back in my chair, letting my shoulders slump like an old man worn thin by the years. "I don't know, son. Some nights this place feels too big, too empty. Maybe it's time I think about something smaller, easier." His glass clinked against the table as he set it down, harder than he meant to. "You don't get it. You can't just throw this away. That house isn't just yours. It's tied to everything I've been working on." The words slipped out before he caught himself. His eyes darted to mine, wide with a flicker of regret. "I mean, for the family, for stability. You'd be putting everything at risk." I studied him, keeping my face blank. "At risk? How could selling my own home put anything at risk for you?" Silence fell. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit he hadn't had since boyhood. Then, after a long pause, the truth leaked out, sharp and ragged. "Because I've already leveraged it." The room seemed to tilt. "What did you just say?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I used the property as collateral. For the business. Just a temporary move until things stabilized. I was going to tell you when it all came through." His words tumbled faster, desperate to fill the silence. "End of the Tem. I was going to tell you. I needed it, Dad. The investors were backing out, and without something solid on the books, we would have lost everything." I sat there, my heart thundering in my ears, but my face stayed calm. He had admitted it. Not only had he stolen my name for the deed, but he had gambled my home, my future, on a failing venture. He reached for my hand across the table, his eyes pleading. "I did it for us. For the family. You have to believe that." I pulled my hand back slowly, the distance between us suddenly wider than the room itself. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You didn't do this for us, Daniel. You did this for yourself." He flinched, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. Behind it wasn't a confident man or a devoted son, but someone cornered, desperate, willing to burn everything just to keep from falling. And as I watched him sit there in silence, I knew the terrible truth: this wasn't just betrayal. It was a confession of something far worse. After he left that night, I sat in the stillness of the house for a long time, my hands trembling against my knees. The words replayed again and again. I leveraged it. Asterisk. My son had turned my home, the last piece of solid ground I owned, into a pawn on a board I had never agreed to play. I didn't sleep. I wandered the rooms instead, brushing my hand along the familiar walls, pausing at every photograph, every keepsake Eleanor and I had gathered through our years together. Each object felt like a testimony to a life built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, and now all of it teetered on the edge of collapse because of the boy I had trusted above all else. By dawn, my reflection in the hallway mirror startled me. My eyes looked older, lined with something harder than time alone could carve. I thought of Daniel as a boy, how he used to run across the yard barefoot, his laughter filling the summer air, how he would curl against me on the couch when thunderstorms rattled the windows. I had carried those memories like treasures. Now they felt like ghosts pressing down on me. The phone rang mid-morning. Martin's voice came through, calm, but taut. "You got him to say it?" "Yes." My voice cracked on the word, but steadied with the next. He admitted he leveraged the house. Every word's on the recording. For a moment, silence filled the line. Then Martin's exhale came, heavy and deliberate. "Then we have what we need. Robert, this changes everything. It's not just fraud anymore. It's calculated theft. But you have to hold steady. If he suspects we're moving against him, he'll double down." I pressed my forehead into my hand, the ache deep in my chest refusing to ease. How am I supposed to face him, knowing this? "You face him the same way you have already, by pretending," Martin said firmly. "You've built bridges your whole life, Robert. This is just another structure. You're holding it together until we can replace the broken beams. Stay calm. Let him think you're still the father he can fool." I wanted to argue, to rage, to finally confront my son and demand to know how he could sit across from me, smile at me, call me Dad, while stealing everything that tethered me to the world. But deep down, I knew Martin was right. This wasn't the moment for rage. This was the moment for resolve. That evening, as the sun set and the house grew dim, I stood at the window and whispered into the silence. "The performance begins now." The words tasted bitter, but they steadied me. From this point on, I would be more than a father nursing a broken heart. I would be an actor, wearing the mask my son expected, while behind it, I gathered the strength to fight back. And though the pain pressed in like a weight I could hardly bear, something colder had begun to form beneath it, a clarity that whispered. The breaking point was no longer in the distance. It was here. The next morning, I drove to Martin's office with the recording tucked in my jacket pocket. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror the weight I carried inside me. I parked in front of the brick building, sat in the car for a moment, and forced myself to breathe. By the time I stepped inside, the decision had already been made. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man preparing for war. Martin ushered me into his office, closing the door firmly behind us. The scent of old paper and fresh coffee filled the room, grounding me in its quiet authority. He gestured for me to sit, then leaned forward across his desk, his eyes sharp. "Do you have it?" I slid the small device onto the polished wood. The click of it touching the surface echoed louder than it should have. Martin picked it up, pressed play, and we both sat in silence as Daniel's voice filled the room. Asterisk. I leveraged it. I used the property as collateral. You don't understand, Dad. If you sell, everything collapses. Asterisk. The words landed like blows. Even though I'd already heard them once. Martin's face hardened. He clicked the device off and leaned back. His fingers steepled beneath his chin. This is enough to begin. It's clear intent. And more than that, it's proof of manipulation. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now, he said. His voice edged with resolve. We strike first. I'm filing an injunction to freeze any transactions involving your property or remaining accounts. That will stop him from moving anything further. At the same time, I'll start drafting a legal action fraud, misrepresentation, elder financial abuse. The law will be on your side, Robert. But we need to be meticulous. If Daniel feels the ground shifting under him, he'll fight back. And he won't fight fair. I nodded slowly, my hands tightening on the arms of the chair. The thought of dragging my own son into court made me sick. But the alternative, losing everything Eleanor and I had built, was worse. Martin must have seen the conflict in my eyes, because his voice softened. I know this isn't the path you ever imagined, he said. But he's already chosen it. You're not destroying him, Robert. You're protecting yourself from what he's already done. I lowered my gaze, staring at the grain of the desk. Protecting myself. It sounded so simple, yet it felt like betrayal, all the same. Still, the recording in Martin's hand reminded me of the truth. The betrayal had already happened. I was only uncovering it. By the time I left his office, the first motions were already in play. Papers were being filed, accounts flagged, legal wheels turning with quiet precision. I walked out into the gray daylight, the city humming around me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside. Not peace, not anger, something colder. Determination. The strike had begun. And soon, Daniel would realize the father he thought he could outmaneuver had drawn a line in the sand. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, a place where time seemed to gather and wait for judgment. I walked through its doors with Martin at my side. My steps slow but deliberate. My chest was tight, my palms damp, yet there was no turning back. The papers had been filed. Daniel had responded. And now the fight had moved from the quiet corners of my home into the full light of the law. We sat together on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, Martin reviewing his notes while I tried to steady my breath. Across the hall, Daniel arrived with his lawyer, a man with slicked hair and a voice that carried even in whispers. My son's face was composed, practiced. He looked almost confident, as if he believed he still held control of the story. When his eyes met mine, he smiled faintly, as though we were simply two men meeting for lunch. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. The mask was holding, but only just. When the bailiff called us in, I felt the world narrow. The room was paneled in dark wood, the flag standing tall beside the bench. The judge entered, her expression unreadable, her gaze sweeping across the room like a blade. We all rose, then sat again, the air thick with the gravity of what was about to unfold. Daniel's lawyer spoke first. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with concern. He painted me as a man in decline, grieving, confused. He told the court I had spoken of irrational plans, selling my house without reason, risking my future in ways that proved I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. He held up papers, affidavits signed by concerned friends who claimed I had seemed forgetful, disoriented. And there sat my son beside him, head bowed, a picture of reluctant duty, as though he were a loving child forced to protect his aging father from himself. It was a performance, a convincing one, and for a moment, I felt my heart falter. The story they told was neat, believable, dangerous. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. But then Martin rose. The shift in the room was subtle but immediate. His voice was calm, deliberate, each word carrying the weight of evidence rather than emotion. He began by dismantling the claim of incompetence, calling to the stand Dr. Evelyn Harper, the independent psychiatrist who had evaluated me. She spoke clearly, firmly, describing me as lucid, methodical, and fully capable of managing his own affairs. Her words rippled through the courtroom, breaking the tidy image Daniel's lawyer had painted. I watched my son's shoulders stiffen. Martin wasn't finished. He laid out our evidence with the precision of a man building a bridge, careful, deliberate, unshakable. Bank statements, signatures, forged reports, each piece stacking on top of the last until the structure stood undeniable. And then, at just the right moment, he pressed play on the recording. My son's voice filled the courtroom. Sharper, harder than I had ever heard it in family gatherings. Asterisk. I leveraged it. You don't understand, Dad. If you sell, everything collapses. Asterisk. Gasps rustled through the gallery. The judge's eyes narrowed. I turned my gaze toward Daniel, and for the first time, his mask cracked. His face paled. His lips pressed into a thin line. He couldn't stop the words. They hung in the air, undeniable. A confession carved into sound. The courtroom was silent when the recording ended. All eyes turned to him, and in that silence, I felt the balance of power shift, not completely. Not yet, but enough to know. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It had stepped into the light. The judge's gaze lingered on Daniel as the recording's echo faded into silence. His lawyer cleared his throat, ready to object. But Martin was already moving, sliding another folder across the table, with the calm precision of a man who knew the tide had turned. Your Honor, Martin said evenly, the recording is only the beginning. What we have here is a map of financial movements, withdrawals, transfers, and deposits that tell a story more honest than any words spoken in this courtroom. He nodded toward Chloe Armstrong, the forensic accountant he had brought in. She took the stand with a quiet confidence, her dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she opened a binder thick with documents and charts. Over the course of 2 years, Chloe began, her voice clear and precise. Funds from Mr. Hayes' retirement and savings accounts were withdrawn in a pattern that corresponds almost exactly to deposits made into accounts controlled by his son, Daniel Hayes. She pointed to a chart projected on the screen behind her, lines of red flowing steadily out of my accounts, lines of green flowing into Daniel's. These are not isolated incidents. They are systematic, coordinated. The courtroom was silent, except for the crisp sound of papers turning as she walked the judge through transaction after transaction. Each withdrawal had a mirror image. A car purchase, a down payment, a luxury trip charged within days of the money leaving my accounts. My chest tightened as photographs appeared on the screen, pictures of Daniel's new SUV, the remodeled kitchen in his home, vacations by the sea. I had never seen those images before, but I recognized the money behind them. My money. Eleanor's sacrifices. The future we had built, brick by brick. Chloe's voice remained calm, clinical. The altered financial statements Mr. Hayes received were fabricated to conceal these withdrawals. Here is an example. She displayed 2 versions of the same document. One polished, balanced, reassuring. The other, the real one, showing thousands siphoned away. The difference was stark, undeniable. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his hands clasped so hard his knuckles whitened. His lawyer whispered something urgently in his ear, but Daniel didn't respond. His eyes darted to me for a brief second, and in that glance, I no longer saw confidence. I saw fear. When Chloe stepped down, Martin rose again, his expression grave. Your Honor, the evidence shows not just deception, but intent. This was not a misunderstanding or a mistake. This was a deliberate effort to bleed his father dry while keeping him in the dark. And the petitioner, who claims to be protecting his father's best interests, has in fact been his greatest threat. The judge leaned back, her fingers steepled, her face unreadable. The weight of the evidence hung heavy in the room, pressing down on everyone present. For the first time, I felt the scales tipping not just toward truth, but toward justice. And yet, even as relief flickered in my chest, I knew Martin had saved the sharpest blade for last. The recording and the charts had shaken Daniel's mask, but what came next would tear it away completely. The courtroom was hushed. Every sound magnified the shuffle of papers, the faint creak of the judge's chair. Martin rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as if giving everyone in the room time to feel the shift that was about to come. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We've shown the transfers, the forged statements, and we've heard Daniel Hayes in his own words. But there is one more truth the court must face before judgment is rendered." He turned toward the clerk, who wheeled in a projector stand. A single document appeared on the screen. The deed to my home. My name was there, but beside it, clear as day, Daniel's signature. "This," Martin continued, "is not just a son helping his father. This is a son stealing from him while he yet lives." The defendant's signature was forged. Expert analysis has confirmed it. Daniel Hayes didn't wait to inherit, he took. The words landed like a blow. I felt every eye in the room shift toward my son. His lawyer started to object, but the judge held up a hand. "Sit down, counselor. I want to hear this." Martin pressed play on the recorder one final time. Daniel's voice filled the room, stripped of its polish, ragged with panic. "Asterisk. If you sell, Dad, everything collapses. Asterisk." When the last word faded, silence stretched long and heavy. The mask Daniel had worn through every hearing, every whispered exchange with his lawyer, finally cracked. His shoulders slumped, his face pale. For the first time, he looked less like the confident man he wanted the world to see, and more like the desperate boy who had built his life on a lie. The judge leaned forward, her eyes unblinking, her voice firm. "This court has heard enough." She lifted the file before her, her words striking like a gavel even before she raised it. "The petition for conservatorship is denied. Effective immediately. All assets under Daniel Hayes' control that are linked to his father's accounts are frozen. Furthermore, this court refers the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation." Her gaze settled on Daniel, sharp and unyielding. "What you've done to your father is not protection, it is predation. And this court will not allow it." The gavel struck, the sound reverberating through the room like the closing of a door. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my chest. Across the aisle, Daniel's lawyer whispered furiously, but my son didn't answer. His eyes darted to mine, wide, frantic, as though searching for the father who had once lifted him onto his shoulders, the man who might still save him from himself. But I could not move. I could not speak. I had spent a lifetime being his anchor, his shield, his steady hand. Today, I had watched that same hand deliver the truth that would undo him. As the bailiff escorted us out, Martin leaned close, his voice low. "It's over, Robert. Justice has spoken." I nodded faintly, but inside I knew the truth was heavier than any ruling. The law could protect what I had left, but nothing, no gavel, no verdict could restore what had already been lost. And yet, even in that sorrow, a thought lingered. Perhaps this ending was only the beginning of something else. A reckoning neither of us could escape. Months passed before the dust began to settle. The sharp edges of the courtroom gave way to quieter days, though the silence in my house felt different now. Less like grief, more like a scar. The roses in the garden had bloomed early that spring, their petals soft and fragrant, a reminder that some things still found a way to flourish even after a storm. Daniel was gone. The charges were moving forward, his accounts frozen, his reputation unraveling. I heard updates through Martin, each one a confirmation that justice was finally catching up to him. Yet none of it brought the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, I carried a hollow ache, the weight of a father who had lived to see his son become a stranger. One evening, I was out in the yard, kneeling in the soil Eleanor had once tended, when I heard the gate creak. A familiar voice called out, softer than his father's, but carrying the same timbre. "Grandpa?" It was Lily, Daniel's daughter, my granddaughter. She walked toward me with hesitant steps, her hair pulled back, her eyes wide, with questions she was too young to ask. She held out an envelope, her hands trembling just slightly. "Dad said I should give this to you." I wiped my palms on my trousers and took it. The handwriting on the front was Daniel's. For a moment, I simply stared. The paper, heavy as stone. Inside was a short letter, apologies, excuses, tangled words of regret written from a cell he could not escape. I read them once, then folded the page carefully and set it aside. My son's voice still echoed in my mind, but I could not carry his burden any longer. Instead, I turned to Lily. I reached into the bench, where I had tucked away a thick envelope Martin had helped me prepare. I placed it gently in her hands. "This," I said, my voice thick, "is something your grandmother wanted you to have. For your future. For the life you deserve." She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the first lines of the trust document that bore her name. Tears welled, though she tried to hide them. She looked up at me, her lips pressed tight, and then she wrapped her arms around me with a strength that surprised us both. I held her close, my chin resting against her hair, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than loss. It wasn't joy, not quite, but a quiet peace, fragile and hard-won. I had lost a son to greed, but I had saved a granddaughter's future. Eleanor's memory was alive in her, in the kindness that hadn't been touched by betrayal. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I whispered to the air, to Eleanor, to myself, "It's over now." The war had ended. The truth had spoken. And though I carried sorrow, I also carried something stronger, the knowledge that even in the face of betrayal, dignity could be reclaimed, and love could still endure.